taking in everything you hope to show them. But it won't work unless it's a good story, and it'll work even better if it's funny. I learned the art of embellishing a yarn with humour while sprawled at my mother's feet. My mum was young, beautiful, and exhausted, but she came alive when she told an entertaining tale. Her eyes shone with mischief, and the stern lines of the mouth that kept us kids in line would soften as she spoke. Her storytelling an escape from the mundane chores of family life, and the hand that dealt her widowhood in her mid-30s. It wasn't hard to notice that she usually slanted her tales away from the truth for the sole purpose of making us laugh. Our joy was her prescription to carry on. As a storyteller, she was good, but she had nothing on her mother, my granny. Lose the image of a blue-rinsed old lady, her knitting on her lap, sipping a lovely cuppa. Oh no, my granny, who was not old, at most in her early 50s when I was a teenager, she'd given birth to my mum at 15, oozed glamour and naughtiness. Joyce, which is what we kids called her, was a northerner, just like us. But she lived half the year on the French Riviera, claiming she needed the warm, dry climate for medicinal reasons. We never quite knew what these were, but the medicine must have worked because she died a week shy of her 90th birthday. And she might have carried on to 100, maybe accumulating another of her many husbands if she'd still been living in France rather than on the seafront in Morecambe, Lancashire, which is notorious for its blustery winds. Nipping to the shops one morning, she was whisked off her feet by a wild gust that deposited her on the hood of a police car. She died a few days later. For 20 years or more, Joyce had fled south to the Côte d'Azur, waving goodbye to the cold English drizzle. She never flew, not because she was afraid of crashing, but because she'd heard that airplane food was dreadful. Instead, she drove. Behind the wheel of a beat-up Volkswagen Beetle, she perched her tiny frame on a pile of cushions so she could see through the windscreen. She was an atrocious driver who should have been banned from the roads, keeping one arm free to gesture rudely to any motorist unlucky enough to be in her vicinity, and clutching the steering wheel with the other. Our own Cruella de Vil somehow survived the 2,000-kilometre drive from Morecambe to Monte Carlo, an inhabitant of two worlds that could not have been more different. Joyce was not the only expat lapping up life on the fashionable beaches in the elegant towns perched along the French Riviera. Nice, Monte Carlo, Cannes and Saint-Tropez, all playgrounds of the rich and the glamorous, were in their heyday in the 1960s and 70s. The Brits, fortunate enough to be able to indulge in a trip abroad, fled their homeland's nastier seasons, desperate to soak up the Mediterranean sun, sea, and endless cocktail parties, following in the footsteps of the aristocrats of earlier centuries who'd been the first to seek a gentler climate for their health. The 7-kilometre palm-lined Promenade des Anglais in Nice is named after them. While my grandmother may have insisted that she went south for her health, she actually went for the parties, especially long afternoons sipping gin and tonic on terraces surrounded by lush vegetation and the gossip, which was her forte. Joyce loved to emboss slices of other people's lives with a mix of both sympathy and glittering wit. No matter how many times she told the same story, which was countless, she always added a new twist. Though she was not a drinker, in the social world of the Côte d'Azur, not to partake was frowned upon, so she faked it. She could nurse a solitary gin for hours, giving the impression she was as tipsy as the rest of the party, a ruse that enabled her to witness and remember the absurdities of the flamboyant, the fascinating, and the dreadful bores. Then she would bring her scandalous tales home to our comfy English living room and shock the knickers off us, though she did try to keep her accounts of the more colourful incidents relatively clean in front of us kids. A Joyce classic was the one about the old movie star who cornered her at a wealthy chic soiree in Cap Ferrat. Perched at the bar, she listened as he tediously rattled on about his performance in a particular Hollywood movie that later garnered him a global award. We didn't care about that. It was what he was doing while he mused.